Hello everyone, it's me again. I just recently finished having a conversation with an agnostic atheist. He's a user on iFunny, and I had a very good conversation with him. I'm going to go ahead and just spell out his username right here, somewhere around this area, simply because it's one with a bunch of underscores and whatnot, so it's a little hard to say in normal conversation. But it's basically a variation on agnatheist, with a couple of underscores and let's see, psi f underscore phy underscore me. But very intelligent, very good conversation I had with him, and in it we kind of had a conversation as to why I am Catholic, and I kind of wanted to share the fruits of that conversation with all of you, because for those who follow my iFunny account, I made a post about how I'm practically the poster boy for people who are brainwashed into their religion. I was born a Catholic, was homeschooled, studied the Catholic faith as part of my homeschool curriculum, and even was in the Catholic seminary for the priesthood for about a couple of years. Excuse me. And I wanted to kind of explain why I remained a Catholic, and that it is my choice as to why I'm still a Catholic to this day, and that it's not entirely because of the situation that I grew up in. And it did help, but the reason why I remained is because of my own reasoning, logic, and arguments to remain a Catholic. Now, part of the reason why I decided to go on this search of argumentation, sorry about that, I was fixing the camera, these reasons, pretty much only my immediate family was Catholic. Very few people on the extended family side were Catholic. I think it was just my mom's parents and one of my mom's sisters, but that was it. Pretty much everyone else was either from another Christian denomination or atheists. And so I had to be able to defend why I was a Catholic in my own terms from a very young age, and so I started looking into the claims and arguments on both sides, actually. And growing up, my parents always said, it's my own choice. Whatever I choose to do, excuse me, the faith is of my own choosing. That as long as I was of a certain age and under their house, I had to go to mass with them. But once I was old enough and able to make my own decisions, then I could choose: do I want to continue the Catholic faith, or do I want to do my own thing? And before you start saying, oh, that's just an elaborate version of brainwashing, my brother took them up on that offer and is no longer practicing the Catholic faith. So I feel like that what they did was a very good way of raising a child, and through my reasoning and arguments, I have remained a Catholic. Before I get started, I do want to explain and elaborate the types of arguments that I'll be using. In a previous video that I did, I criticized the definition that someone had put up about contemporary logic. Now, there's many different types of logic, and a lot of atheists are of a school of thought called empiricism, which means that you cannot know something as being true until it has been physically presented to you. While I acknowledge that position sounds very good, I think there's more to it than that, for a couple of reasons. The first reason is empiricism cannot prove itself. What do I mean by that? Well, if everything that you can know for a fact is empirically proven to you, for something to be empirically proven to you, it needs to be sensed through sight, smell, touch, taste, hear, what sense perception gave you the knowledge that only sense perception is knowledge? That's an issue that I noticed with empiricism. Well, not only I. There's many thinkers who made that distinction as well. But from that, I started to fall more into the line of, well, if I do acknowledge we do get a lot of our truths and knowledge from our sense perceptions, but there's more to it than that. For example, math. We never experienced a number or a line. And yet, however, we acknowledge things as true from those lines. I mean, take a look at geometry. We never experience a triangle. I mean, certainly we see things in the shape of a triangle, but it's not a triangle. And even the triangle that you see on the geometry homework assignments aren't triangles at all, and at least that's what the geometry teacher tells you. That it's merely a representation of the triangle. We never actually experience a bona fide triangle, and yet we're convinced that there is such a thing as triangles. And so what does that mean? It means that we can come to knowledge that is not sense-based or sense-perceived through reason, but the reason has to have some basis in our experience. Now, what does that mean? It means that from experience, we learn about cause and effect, but we never actually experience cause and effect. It is an observation made from seeing one ball hit another ball and that second ball going on in motion. But we never actually saw cause. We never actually saw effect. That is something that our reason came about. David Hume, who is an atheist empiricist, acknowledges this fact that we don't actually experience cause and effect. It's a intellectual concept that we have come up with in order to make sense of the world. And so continuing on from that, if it is possible for us to use our reason to come up with truths about the world, then they must be based in experience or have some basis in experience, but the conclusion doesn't necessarily need to be based in experience. So I'm going to go ahead and start the argument now, or the reasoning that I had. Well, one of the first things that I could know from experience is that I'm a living physical being. And why is that? Well, I am a physical being because I have senses. And I'm a living being because I have experience. And only living beings can have experience, and only physical beings can have senses. Now, from that, it's pretty clear that I'm also what many philosophers call a composite being, which means a being that is composed of parts. Think of like a puzzle, for example. You have the many different parts, but they all come together to make the one puzzle picture. That's what a composite being is. It's many parts that make up one unit. And science supports this as well. We have the different atoms, cells, molecules, things like that. But even in a larger scale, I'm a physical living being. The ancient definition of human being was rational animal. And that kind of still encompasses the idea of the living physical being. Now, there is a distinction I want to make. Physicality is not equivalent to being alive. We have rocks, tables, things of that nature that, while physical, they're not alive. So it seems to me that being alive does not necessarily mean that it needs to be physical. In my previous video as well, I made the argument about I made an argument about the possibility of the existence of non-physical conscious beings who experienced reality in a non-sensible way. They had experiences of reality that was not based on sense experience. And it seems to me that that's a very real possibility, that life is not dependent on the physicality of something. Now, the atheist that I talked with, agnatheist, raised the question that it seems to him that no matter, even if consciousness, it can be separated from the body, it would still be manifested in some physical way, kind of similar to the ki from different Asian religions. Now, I'm no expert in Asian religions, but just from the little bit of literature that I have read, like 47 Ronin was one, and there's a couple of others. I will admit most of it's manga and anime, but it's still based on their ideas and philosophies. But the key that they talk about is always a spiritual thing, a non-physical thing. Now, in literature like Dragon Ball Z, that ki is given a physical aspect, element. The different Dragon Ball Z characters are able to fly around because of their ki, but you can't see it. They're so full of life, and they're able to express that life energy in such a way it affects the reality around them. But that's a literary thing that Akira Toriyama did in the Dragon Ball Z literature, but it's my understanding that it's always a non-physical, spiritual element. Now back to composite beings. Composite beings, like I said, is when two things are put together to make one thing. And so those elements that make up that composite being were once separated. And it can be more than two things. I'm just kind of using this as an easy example. So in my situation, my physicality and being alive were given to me by my parents. My parents had the different physical elements that I needed, the different cells and things like that, and they also gave me life. They were able to put that stuff together through the act of sex. So, but there's just one problem with that. I've now answered as to why I exist, but now I need to answer the question of why my parents exist. And then once I say, well, it's the parents, I've got to answer that question again. Well, why do their parents exist? And we go on and on and on and on until finally we get to I believe it's the particle, which is the smallest possible thing that could exist during the Big Bang. And now before someone attacks me on this, I'm not denying evolution. At no point in my argument have I denied evolution or done away with evolution. I'm just merely looking at why is there existence. Actually, at this point, I'm going to take a quick break to kind of clarify a distinction that I noticed about the difference in science and philosophy. If I were to ask, why does a ball fall down when I let go of it? The scientist would respond with the theory of gravity and the formula of gravity and everything like that. Well, that tells me how and the cause of the ball falling to the ground, but it doesn't tell me why it is that the ball even falls to the ground. Why do bodies attract each other? Why is it that particular formula and not this one? And philosophy is the attempt to explain the why of things, and science explains the how. So I'm not denying evolution. That's not an issue at this point, because that answers the how I exist. My question is, why do I exist? And so back what I was saying, so we have those molecules, they're still composites, even though they're the simplest things that we can think of. They're a composite of existence and matter, or physicality. Now, earlier I made the distinction of rocks being physical but not alive. Now, rocks have existence, but they're not alive. They have that physicality and existence, but they're not alive. And so molecules are the composite of existence and matter. And again, agnathists raised the question, well, can it really be the case that something where you have one thing that is so essential to the other that they can even be separated at any point whatsoever? So in this case, in order for something to be physical, it has to exist. So it seems that physicality and existence are so tightly knit together that they are one and the same. That's where we get into the distinction between properties and accidents. Now, it is accidental that I have brown hair. It could have been the fact that I was born with blonde hair. I could have been born with any other type of hair color, but it would not affect the fact that I am a human being. Now we get into properties. Now, properties themselves are of the same way, where they don't actually affect the composition, the nature, if you want to use that word, or the whatness of the thing. A common example used by Thomas Aquinas is that it is a property of man to laugh. If man is a rational animal, he has the capability to recognize things that are irrational, and the response of that recognition is laughter. However, laughter is not essential to the nature of man. It comes directly from the very fact that man is a rational animal, if we want to use that definition. Another example is heat for fire. Now, heat comes directly from the very thing of what a fire is. But if we happen to have a fire that was cold, it would still be fire, but it wouldn't just have that property of heat. So it is possible for there to... So that's what existence is. Existence is a property of a physical thing, or even, as I stated earlier, the non-physical beings that are alive. The existence is a property. And what is a good way to show that? Take a rock, for example. Picture a rock in your mind. You have all of the elements and the things necessary for that rock to exist within your mind, except existence itself. That's kind of the best example that I can give as to the separation of physicality and existence. Physicality and existence are not completely tied together. Existence is a property of it, but it is not necessary to what it means to be a rock or to be a human. It comes from the very fact that you are a human. It's a property of you. Now, so going back to the question of the molecules that are the composites, something had to put them together. The existence and the matter. Can something cause its own existence? It seems to me that the answer has to be no, because of the law of non-contradiction and cause and effect. If something doesn't exist, by logics, laws, and everything else that we know, it can't cause anything. I am not affected whatsoever by my non-existence 10th cousin twice removed. I am not affected whatsoever by the non-existent person that's sitting right across from me. So cause and a non-existent person cannot be caused cannot cause anything. And if something already, if something could cause its own existence, it by definition would have to exist in the first place, which then you're asking you're asking me, okay, cause your own existence right now. Well, I already exist, so I can't cause it. Now, I recently saw, and again, this was shown to me by agnatheists, a little bit of a lecture by a professor or a Dr. Lawrence Krauss, and he talks about, at the time of the Big Bang, molecules popping in and out of existence, but he doesn't say why they exist, pop in and out of existence, why they appear to have no cause. He just kind of accepts that, oh, they just pop in and out. Well, I do acknowledge that, I mean, that's, perfectly fine. It still falls into what I'm talking about. They still have that issue of why are they popping in and out of existence? Why are they able to cause their own existence? And he hasn't given an answer for that as far as I know. And what I hope to do here is to provide that answer. Because we still need that explanation. Now, I'm not going to be doing a special pleading here. The being that I will be presenting will be its own explanation to exist. So we've come across that a composite being or a composite thing is always starts off separated and is then brought back together. And we have the situation where it can't be physical, because if it was physical, it's automatically a composite being. It's physical plus existence. Well, what about those beings that I mentioned earlier, just the pure living beings? Well, that's, as many philosophers put it, would be form and existence put together. Those living beings are often, in many religions, are called angels. They have a form, they have a way to distinguish themselves from each other. And so they are form and existence as well. So we're still stuck with, okay, well, what type of being am I looking for? I'm looking for something that always has to exist. It's against its nature to exist. And the only thing that popped into my head was existence itself. The only being that could exist for all eternity is existence. Why? Well, in order for things to exist, there has to be existence in the first place. I mean, like I said, that's a simple composite thing. Now, existence would be simple. It just is pure existence. There's nothing to it, just existence itself. It would not be composite. And like I said, it wouldn't be a physical thing because, again, that would nullify the compositeness of it. So what about, could it be the case where so why then is this, what then exactly is this being of pure existence? Well, it's the source of everything. It's, that's really what it is. It's just the source of everything. It is. Why would it be able to exist for all eternity? Because something can't be against its nature. For example, fire cannot be frozen. I know I made the comment about fire not having heat. There's a difference between not having heat and being frozen. Frozen is lack of molecular movement, and heat is molecular movement. So that's just an impossibility. You can't have a lack of, and you can't have A and not A at the same time. So this being a pure existence would always have to exist, and it also could not be caused, because if it was caused to have existence, you are then saying that something existed before existence did, which again is a a logical contradiction. So I acknowledge I cannot provide physical proof other than me. I mean, I exist, and it seems like the only possible way for me to exist is the existence of this being of pure existence, because we just run into that problem of the composite beings. And so agnatheist, again, very well put forward a question. So from your reasoning, you have at least accepted a deistic universe, and I can see why you would accept a deistic universe. So why did you accept a religion? What was your thought process of remaining in the particular religion that you are in right now? Why didn't you just stay at a deistic universe? And so next, what I did in my thought process growing up, so what would happen if this God just created us and either A, did not care about us, or B, didn't know we existed? There are two schools of thought on this area that do talk about a deistic universe. It seems to me that pretty much the one thing that those two things have in common is that this God would not interact with us whatsoever. He would either A, be observing us, or B, just have no idea we were even there, so he wouldn't interact with us. But if he created us out of love, which Catholicism and Christian religions claim, it would seem to make sense that he would interact with us. Now, it might very well be the case that he didn't interact with us, but if we saw signs of his interaction, then that would mean that that particular religion has the truth, and that particular religion is the one that God is in charge of. And so I started looking through the ancient religions to see if I could find a sign of that interaction of God with his creatures. And something you need to understand about the vast majority of ancient religions during that time period, they believed that their gods weren't just in charge of whatever they were in charge of, but they were the very thing itself. So like, for example, Apollo really was the sun. He wasn't the god of the sun. He was the sun. And so you have different things like that. You have Gaia. She wasn't the goddess of the earth. She was the earth. And so I almost kind of at the very beginning threw out pantheism out the window already, because we have that being that is the source of everything and is pure existence. Well, in order for there to be a distinction between gods, there has to be a difference. One has to be the source of something or of something else. Let me rephrase that. In order for there to be more than one God, in order to distinguish between them, one God would have to be the source of one thing, and the other God would have to be the source of something else. And so they wouldn't be the source of everything, that therefore it wouldn't be God. At least that's my thinking on it, but I'll kind of get into... That wasn't the only reason why I threw out pantheism, but it certainly was one of the main things as to why I mostly ignored pantheistic religions. But I did basically look at the king god, or the god king of the different pantheistic religions that I was aware of. And none of them, as far as I know, have a god that is pure existence. Someone recently mentioned to me the Hindus have a god that is pure existence. Now, so why am I not a Hindu? As far as I know, that was something that they claim on their own. They make no claim that this God actually came down and revealed himself to them. But it could very well be the case that that is what, that is the actual religion. I eventually settled on regardless of when whether or not you accept the actual validity of at least the book of Exodus, whether or not it was describes an accurate, true account of what happened. There is something in there that was accepted by the Jewish faith for years, and that is the name of their God, which is I am. As a priest once told me, the Jewish God's name for himself is I am. Our name for him is he is. Now, if you recall my talk about the being that is pure existence, he is. It really is our best name for him, and the best name for that this being would give to himself is I am. He always is, always was, and always will be. So this being, or this name that the Jewish people had for their God, they claimed was revealed to them. And I am willing to accept that as being very likely, but, for the sake of argument, let's assume that it's just a lie. Well, the earliest that this lie could have formulated was around 1600 BC. And the Jewish people at the time were shepherds, uneducated shepherds. That was their class. That really was what they were at the time. This was during the time of that's attributed to the Exodus. When Exodus actually was, or when the latest that Exodus could have been written down, is during the Babylonian exile, which is around 598 BC, I believe. And so we have, the book of Exodus coming about, and it, again, like I said, I'm willing to accept for this argument's sake that it's a lie, but I don't think it is. And but you still had within that tradition the people accepting the idea of God being I am. Now, the Jewish people themselves weren't philosophical in any shape or form. They only followed the law. They didn't really care about the why of things. You just do the law because it's the law. That was their motivation for their religion, as I kind of mentioned in the previous video. So at this point, and so the other reason why it also seems unlikely that the Jewish people could not have come up with this, or at least heard about it from another place, they had no contact with the Hindus, like I said, and I don't know exactly when the Hindu idea of their supreme God being nothing but pure existence, because, the Hindu religion is still around today. And you also have the Greeks. The book of Exodus at the latest was written at least 100 years before the birth of Aristotle, and it was another 50 years after that birth of Aristotle before Alexander the Great came and conquered the known world and spread Greek thought. And Aristotle was the closest to coming, during that time period, the closest to realizing this idea of God being pure existence, that as he described it, God is, or the supreme being, would be thought thinking itself. And it wasn't until Thomas Aquinas that the idea of God being pure existence came about. Now, before you say, well, now you're just quoting Thomas Aquinas to us during this whole argument, the argument that I presented for the being of pure existence, while it is very similar to Thomas Aquinas' proof for God from his book On Being and Essence, I came up with that proof several years before I read On Being and Essence. At that point, I had pretty much only read the 5 proofs for the existence of God, and his proof for the existence of God as being pure existence is not found in the 5 proofs. So I find it interesting that I was able to so what I presented to you is not me just ripping off of another thinker. I came up with those thoughts on my own. And so it seems very, back to the Jewish question, it seems very unlikely that the Jewish people were able to lie so convincingly to themselves and to others that God was pure existence. Because like I said, for them, well, another aspect of gods that I forgot to mention is that the name of a god revealed what it was. And so for God's name to be I am, he was revealing his essence, that he is existence. Which, like I said, seems unlikely for just a bunch of shepherds to come up with this. So it seems to me that Judaism is the religion that was first founded by God. So why am I a Christian? Well, another aspect of Judaism is the promise of the Messiah. And from what we can tell, even from third sources, Josephus is a good one. He was a historian during the time of the destruction of the Jewish temple. He himself was a Jew, but he was not a practicing Jew. He was all for the Roman Empire, so the Jewish people would have viewed him as a traitor. So he's not writing these with in favor of his Jewish brethren whatsoever. He's just writing in favor of the Roman Empire. And he makes a mention about a man by the name of Jesus who came from Nazareth, who was crucified at the behest of the religious leaders, and he was acclaimed by many to be a great prophet. So that's, and there's several other sources. We do have Roman records of a man named Jesus being put to death, and we also have, I don't know who wrote it, but it was a non-believer writing to his son, ridiculing the Jewish people for not accepting Jesus as their king. So we do have several sources admitting that there was a man by the name of Jesus who lived during the time that Christianity claims he lived and died, according to the claims of Christianity. And he makes a very interesting claim. He claims to be the Son of God, and how does he show this? By forgiving the sins of people. He forgave the sins of people. So why is that unusual? Well, by him forgiving the sins of people, there's only really one person that can forgive a transgression, and that is the person who the transgression was done against. So if there is a God, which at this point in time, I hope that you'll accept at least that it is a valid position to have, that there is a God, that not just ignorant, stupid people believe that there is a God. It is possible to believe the existence of God and still be an intelligent human being. And let's say that sins do offend this God. So, suppose you stole something. If there is a God, there's two people that can forgive you of that transgression. The person you stole from and God himself, because that sin is a transgression against God. And what Jesus was doing while he was around was he was essentially walking into a courtroom of a mass murderer, looking that mass murderer in the eye and saying, "Are you sorry? I forgive you." And then telling the judge to let him go because he's not going to press any charges. But he had no relation to the victims whatsoever. That's really what Jesus was doing. And there's only three types of people that would do this: a lunatic, a liar, or someone who's telling the truth. I'm going to go down the order of what I think is least likely to most likely. I think it's least likely that he's a liar. And the reason why is because he died. Every source acknowledges that Jesus died. And we do know that he died because of the leaders either being jealous or accusing him of blasphemy, which was the forgiveness of sins. So if he died, lost, or because of his claim to be God, it seems very, very unlikely for me that anyone, regardless of their lie, would be willing to die for that lie. So that seems very unlikely for me. The second claim, while it does fix the issue of someone being willing to die for something that is not true, you would be mad. You honestly believe that you're God when you really are not, and you would be willing to die for that claim because you really believe that you are God and would not be willing to admit you're wrong or your mistake. But someone who is insane about their nature, the way that they are, would not be able to embarrass the religious leaders time and time and time again. And I mean, if the religious leaders felt that Jesus was insane, they would have just ignored him. They would have paid him no heed. But because he was able to ridicule them, if you are willing to accept the accounts of the Gospels as having some historical accuracy, he was able to ridicule them time and time and time again, which is not something that a madman would do. The madman would just kind of sit there and insist, no, I am God, I am God, I am God. And people would just ignore him. So, while the most likely of the two, either lying or being a madman, would be the madman in my opinion, just because lying makes absolutely no sense. The madman theory still does not encompass everything, although I would be willing to accept people's position that Jesus was a madman. I'd be a little bit more hesitant to accept their position that he was a liar, simply because that simply flies in the face of the facts that we have, or seems to. The thing is then, if you accept that Jesus is a madman, you kind of have to ignore everything else that he says, which most people don't seem to want to do. Most people seem to acknowledge, well, he did have some things right, which madmen usually don't. But that might just be my opinion. So it seems to me more likely, however, that he was telling the truth, that he is God, he was able to forgive sins, and that explains why he was willing to die for that claim, why he was able to outsmart the Jewish leaders time and time and time again. And the Jewish leaders were the learned, they were the doctors, the academic professors, the university teachers of the time. The only education that Jesus would have had as a human being would have been what would have been available for a carpenter. And pretty much the education that was available for Jewish people at that time who didn't devote themselves to something like that was essentially the scriptures themselves. Not a whole lot of other education other than that. Certainly not enough to outwit doctors or people with doctorates, I guess would be the better way to put that. So it seems to me that the most likely conclusion we can arise from that situation is that Jesus' claims of being God are accurate. So why am I Catholic and not just one of the many Christian religions that are out there? Well, if Jesus' claims that he is God are accurate, and I kind of forgot to mention this, but in my discussions with agnathists, I made the distinction that this being a pure existence would exist outside of time, and time is the measurement of change, and so eternity is the lack of change, so God would be unable to change. So Christ comes down, and he is God, and he tells the apostles that the gates of hell will never prevail against the church, and that means that while the church might make some mistakes, that while it might have some difficulties, it's never going to lose, and that he will be with that church until the end of time. So, which church is that? And so I started looking at the different Christian faiths, denominations, and every single Christian denomination is able to point to a human being as their founder. For example, the Lutherans have Martin Luther. The Calvinists have John Calvin. So, what does the Catholic Church have? the Catholic Church points directly to Peter, and you can see that through the succession of the popes, points directly to Peter, and Peter got his decree from Christ. You will do this, and so in a sense, the Catholic Church is the one that was founded by Christ, and has that promise of having the gates of hell never prevailing against it, and that God will be with it until the end of time. And so that is why I'm a Catholic. That because of that promise, and I feel like that's the true religion that one should be in. I am open for your thoughts and opinions on this question, and if you have any questions that need or areas that I wasn't clear on, go ahead and leave it in the comments. I do ask, however, that we all be respectful here. What I have done here is I have, the burden of proof was on me. Now I have presented my proof and my positions on it. So now if you want to dispute my claims, the burden of proof is on you. You have to present proof that contradicts my claims and show why my claims are false, and present your own theory as to the status of things. I do ask that we all, we're all humans here. We all deserve respect. So I do ask that you present your thoughts and your opinions in a respectful way. I will try to avoid deleting comments, but if your comment is not, I can deal with hate against me, but if your comment is nothing against hate to another individual who is trying to present his position on things, I will delete it, regardless if you are a Christian or an atheist. I do not want that on this video, as this video is to help people realize why I am a Catholic, and maybe to clear up some misunderstandings there are about the claims of religion. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I apologize for the length of it, but I feel like it was necessary for what the video is. And I hope you have a good day.